Welcome to this week's episode of Being Bookish. I'm your host Ray, self-confessed bookworm, introvert, hermit, and long-term depression sufferer. As you may be able to tell, this differs from my usual episodes, so let's get straight to the content you're here for. Join me and my guest, author Julie Owen Moylan, as we talk about her brand new historical novel, Circus of Mirrors. The story of two sisters living in Berlin, looking at the way they survive 3 different periods of turmoil that affect their home and their lives. I am here with Julie Owen Moylan to talk about her new novel, which comes out on the 12th of September, Circus of Mirrors. Julie, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
I love talking about different types of book. I'm very 1920s. I love Agatha Christie. So her 1920s books are my thing. And when I saw the cover for this, it was like, I have to read it. And I got sent a copy and it is stunning. I mean, I know that this is obviously, it's not the final proof, but the style of it is very cabaret.
Yeah.
And the more you read of the book, the better it is. So I want, we don't do spoilers here, but I would love you to talk about, tell us what the book is about so that people can get a really good idea.
Sure. Well, the book is basically a story of 2 sisters, Leni and Annette. And it opens in 1926. And there's quite a large age gap between Leni and Annette. Leni's 19 years old and Annette's 6. And they've been orphaned in that awful period after the First World War. So Leni has become almost the carer for her younger sister. And out of desperation, she takes a job at this underground cabaret club called the Babylon Circus, which is full of a very diverse cast of strange and wonderful characters, of which she's never seen the like before. And she falls in love with the piano player, Powell. And it's really the story of these 2 sisters and what happens with this grand love affair. And it plays out over a 40-year period against the backdrop of Berlin in 3 separate periods, in the 1920s, in the aftermath of World War II, and then in the early 1960s.
Yeah, it does span such an incredible and traumatic period of time in that city. And I mean, I'm not old enough to remember 1961, but I do remember the Berlin Wall coming down and all of the coverage that was around that. Obviously, we didn't have the internet at that point, so it was all TV news and things. But reading these 2 characters, their development, their growth, and the experiences they went through is incredible. So what was the inspiration for creating both of these characters and the life that they lived?
I've always been really fascinated with Berlin as a city, because Berlin as a city kind of changes character every few decades almost. And in this book, it almost becomes a character, I think, because it's such a different background in these 3 periods. Yeah. But I studied history many, many years ago. And one of the periods that I studied was this particular period of the kind of interwar years in Berlin and the Weimar Republic years. And I was just absolutely fascinated by this. So that has always been in the back of my mind of what a fascinating city, what a fascinating period the 1920s were. And wouldn't it be great to kind of set something there? And then I had a thought that came out of one of the characters in my last book, 73 Dove Street, where the landlady Phyllis is being annoyed in a pub by some bloke who wants to tell her about his war service. And she says, well, we all had a war, didn't we? And when I was doing reader events, we were kind of talking about this idea of women and how different your life can be depending what time you were born, when you were born, the place you were born, as to what kind of rights you have, what the economic situation is going to be like for you, because women bear a lot of the brunt, I think, of those situations. And I thought, well, that would be interesting to take those thoughts and put it against the backdrop of Berlin, which keeps changing and keeps offering up different challenges to these women who are trying just to live their ordinary lives, really, and to find love and be loved and feel safe and all of those good human things that we're all trying to do.
Yeah, and giving Leni the responsibility of her younger sister at such a young age, and then coming up against all of those trials, it's a fantastic backdrop. I felt, it sounds awful, I was never a fan of Annette as I read the book. I don't know what it was about her. I've got younger siblings myself, and I found her quite, I don't know if it was intentional, but she came across as incredibly selfish, and that got worse as she got older, whereas Leni sacrificed and continued to sacrifice while almost sort of burying the resentment that she felt for that.
I think, yeah, I mean, with Annette, I mean, it was entirely intentional to make her that selfish. What I wanted to show, I think Leni, I think if you're an older sibling and you have the care for a younger sibling, or anybody who's in a caring kind of role, there's part of that is a kind of burden that you carry, but inside maybe, Leni is very responsible, but she's very soft and gentle, and she's quite romantic, I think. And I think she wants to be free. She wants to be irresponsible. She'd love to be like some of the characters she sees around her, just doing as they please and living their own life. But Leni's not like that. She will get up every day and go to work. She will do the right things. And I wanted a contrast to Leni. And also, when I build characters, I try to do it out of what I feel their circumstances would have really led them to be like. So I thought, well, Annette would probably be quite clingy towards Leni and possessive towards her, because she would be all that she had. But the way that might come out might be through her feeling quite fearful. And often when people are inside quite fearful people, they mask it, and they mask it usually through a performance of stubbornness or determination or anger or lashing out at people. And I think Annette just has this real selfish core to her because it's based on fear. All she's thinking about. And I think when you read the book and you look at their early life together, you can kind of understand where that's come from.
It's her abandonment, isn't it?
Yeah, that you can really feel sorry for her a little bit, I think, and go, yeah, I can understand why you're just this little kid. You're just a little baby, really, and all of this life is happening around you that you don't all fully understand, and so that has made you quite selfish. And yes, that carries on. And I think then when you come to the 1947 part of the book, Annette feels that, I mean, she's about 27 then. So she feels, I think, that she's had her entire youth taken away from her, that they've been at war for 5 or 6 years by that point in, and she's kind of, not been able to do a lot of the things that she thought she would be able to do. So she's quite resentful of that. And then with this inner core of selfishness, I think that brings out some of the scenes that are my absolute favorites probably in the book. It's lovely writing a character that can just be so absolutely self-centered and
almost oblivious to the fact that she's in almost the same situation as her sister was in at a younger age, because yes, okay, she had her youth taken away from her, but Leni had her youth and her adulthood taken away from her, and is caring for a child that isn't hers. because of I find the psychology of characters like Annette very, very interesting, because she is one of those, I'm very, very selfish. I suffer from abandonment issues, but I've got no issue inflicting that upon somebody else.
Yes. Well, I think that's part of the joy of sometimes writing a character that you know that people are going to go, oh, she's really selfish. I don't like her. Good. I'm glad you don't like her. I love that you don't like her. That is the entire point. But by the end of the book, I want you to go, oh, now I understand her. Oh, okay. Now I understand her a bit. And I see where this comes from. And some of her behavior, is not great, and towards her sister is not.
Oh yes,
right.
Towards her sister is, I felt such kinship with Leni. I just wanted to give her a massive hug.
Yes. And you should, I think we all should look at Leni and go, oh no, this woman needs a break. She needs some, she needs just to have some good times in her life, and we want that for her. And obviously have to read the book to find out whether they actually arrive. But we're all rooting for Leni. And at the same time, I think we'd all like to give Annette a bit of a shake, but
kick up the backside.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think of her in a kind of like a Scarlett O'Hara type character, really, that kind of selfishness, but kind of desperation out of post-war years, is that I'm never gonna go back here. I'm gonna, have my own way here. I'm gonna have a life that I want, and is very single-minded about that.
That's the thing, though. Leni has that strength as well. She's not really a Melanie, but she does have Scarlett's strength in that respect, because she just pushes on, and it's like, oh well, that's happened, I'm just going to get on with things. And that was a massively admirable trait from her character. I loved her for the fact that she was like, it's happened, can't do anything to change it, so I'm just going to get on with things. Even if inside you sort of have that, her heart is probably absolutely shattered, but she knows she can't change it.
Yes, I think that's true. And also, of course, true of all women in her situation and of her age, that the choices she found herself with were few.
Yeah.
And so what can you do then? Is just say, well, I'm going to take whatever is on offer to me in this life and make the best of it, and get up and go to work and care for people that I have responsibility for. And that's that. Whereas Annette is very much fighting against it all the time. And I don't want this life. I'm going to make another life, a better life. And I am not going to stop till I get there. And I think the contrast between the two of them, coming from the same kind of background, is quite interesting, and just plays into this idea of the kind of roles that where you're born in a family determines sometimes part of your personality and part of your makeup. It's that kind of, I have great sympathy with Leni, because I'm an oldest child, so so I do have that kind of real sympathy, and my husband is a youngest child, so although he didn't like Annette at all, that she was very selfish, he had more understanding and kind of sympathy, because she was only little, and there were, and of course, as an oldest child, she just needs to sort herself out and stop being annoying.
That's the thing. I'm the oldest child of two youngest children.
Yeah, me too.
So then they would never understand the oldest child mentality. There is that dynamic in, there's a trio of us, me, my brother and my sister, and of course my brother being the only boy and the middle child, and then my younger sister being the baby, and it never changed.
Yes, and I think that happens in most families. I think that those roles get set down quite early, and of course when you go through a traumatic start to life like Leni and Annette did, being orphaned, then they're going to be probably laid down even more strongly. That Annette thinks that everybody around her is just there to take care of her and do what's best for her. I don't think she's cruel. I just think there's part of her that's kind of like having a chip missing, that there's just part of her that it never occurs to her that her sister is a real human being who has her own wants and needs and maybe could do with, a bit of a break in her life.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that definitely comes across closer to the end in the final sort of part of the book, where we have Annette in her completely different life returning to spend some time with Leni and observing her sister almost as though she's detached from the life that she once led, and she can't understand why her sister is still living it.
Yeah, I think, and again, I think this can often happen if you leave the place where you were brought up or that you've lived for a great deal of time, and you go away and you have a completely different life, and then you come back and you think, oh, there's a tendency, I think, to believe that people have all stayed the same. It's just you that's been off having an exciting time, or learning new things, or experiencing growth as an adult human being, and they come back and think that everybody is like, oh, poor you're still living in this same place or living this same kind of life. And of course, everybody is in life gets older and learns different things and changes and has periods of growth. So I think when these two sisters come back together in the 1960s, by which time Leni is like 54 and Annette is 41, so they're both kind of middle-aged women then, they have a very different view and understanding of each other. And then obviously, without giving any spoilers, that leads to a crisis.
Yes.
And then by the end of the book, I think they have a very different relationship going forward, because I think there is a moment of clarity there where they each look at the other and go, oh my goodness me, I don't think I really knew you at all.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that is the moment where Annette almost realizes, wow, I was just a tad selfish, perhaps.
Maybe just a tad.
That's a massive understatement in my perspective.
Yes.
But
yeah.
Were any of these characters, or did they spring from inspiration from your personal friend group, from stories you'd heard, or historical characters in any way?
My characters always just come out of the ether, really. That every time I start a book, I have a kind of idea. I know I'm going to be writing about quite complicated women because I love to do that. I love to take women and put them in complicated situations. And I think when I'm writing, a lot of it is kind of me asking myself, well, what would you do if you were in that situation? What choices would you make? I think they're almost like tiny little moral dilemmas. It's like, well, if you were Leni, what would you have done there? If you were Annette, what would you have done? So I'm always trying to work these things out for myself. But with my characters, I usually start with some kind of vague idea. I knew I wanted to write about sisters, but beyond that, I didn't know who they were going to be. And then it's like a little bit of magic in the process, really. I always start with their names, and I always go through kind of these kind of lists of popular names or unusual names. I'm always looking for something that's slightly different. And I always know when I found it, it's just, I don't know what it is. There is something about, it's like I have this kind of writing mantra, which sounds quite woo-woo, but it helps me not to get writer's block, that I have this kind of belief that almost like the book is out there somewhere, and all I have to do is receive and write it. And then that makes it a lot easier just to sit down and carry on writing. And so, but there is a little bit of magic to this process, because I always know when I come across a name, I go, that's who she is. It's like, I don't know, a stranger, and you think, oh, that looks like a Beryl or Susan or something, and then you find out their name, and and you're like, yeah, that name really suits that person.
It's sort of like that game that you play at a coffee shop.
Yes.
Make up their life.
Yes, exactly. So once I have the kind of names, I don't know. I just focus in on the characters until I can really feel them. I need to be writing from kind of behind their eyes almost, so that I'm feeling what they can feel and I'm viewing the world as they would view it. I describe it sometimes as being like when you get into a car and you fasten your seatbelt and you get that clunk, you know that you're safely strapped in. And it's a bit like that for me with characters, that when I just get that feeling that, I know I'm in this kind of person. I know who Leni is now. I know who Annette is. And I don't know what they're going to do often. I mean, I did plan this book out because it was so complicated being 3 different time periods. But I don't usually plan a lot. And even within a plan, so the characters will please themselves and go off for a tangent, and I will say, well, that's not actually in my plan, but I'm going to have to rejig the plan because she's just
done what they want to do.
Yeah. So it's always a kind of an interesting part of writing is the character development, but I do love like character-led fiction more than anything else. So I really try to get the characters that are fleshed out and feel like they're real people.
You said that you planned this one, and you, from the sound of it, you're normally a fly by the seat of your pantser.
Yes.
How I used to be quite often, especially with university essays, but we don't need to go there. But did you actually, with your plan, did you start with the I know how I want it to end? Or did you have I know what periods I want to write about?
I knew what period I wanted to write about. So the thing that I've always found whenever you read a book about Berlin, it's usually about the rise of Nazis. And it's about the war, and it's about something about Nazis. And, I have studied that period at great length. And also the period that came before it and the period that came after.
Yeah, we did the Weimar Republic. I remember studying it not only in German class, but also in history class. And of course, we were closer to it.
Yes.
Because I was studying it in the 1980s. So it was something that really it was recent history.
Yes, exactly. And I didn't want to write a story that revolved around the Nazis coming to power or what actually happened in the war, because it's been done so many times. And what I was interested in was writing a story about women, just ordinary working class women, trying to live their lives, and sisters who had a complicated dynamic because their parents had died. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Where can we go with this? And then I knew I wanted to write some kind of cabaret club. The Babylon Circus is actually based upon a real life cabaret club in Berlin that shut down in 1923, which was years before this. But it was called the White Mouse Club. And it was a club where people used to wear masks in the club. And I thought, I saw a photograph of it because I get a lot of great ideas and research from vintage photographs and documentaries and things. And I saw a photograph of these people looking very glamorous in this club, all wearing these little eye masks. And I thought, oh my goodness, yes, I want to write about something like that. And then I thought, oh, I get my complicated sisters and put them into that situation and see what happens. And from there, then I knew I wanted to write about the 1920s and that kind of cabaret club and a cast of characters there. And I wanted to write a love story that endured in some fashion through, at least in the hearts of one of these sisters, throughout these decades. So I thought, well, this will be interesting. And then I wanted to go into the aftermath of the war, because I thought that was really fascinating when your city is being turned almost into rubble. There are so many issues there. And I thought, oh, now that's a really interesting time to have a look at two complicated women and what they might be up to. And how do you start again from that? And how do you live your life from that?
Yeah, I think that's the thing that comes across. As you said, the city is almost a character, but the story of the White Mouse Club and everything, that is, it's almost like that's a mysterious, almost mystical element, because
Mm,
there was something so because it was underground,
yeah,
there was something. It does remind me very much, obviously, of Liza Minnelli in Cabaret, because there was that element of glamour to it
yeah,
without it being, it wasn't something official, and if you were found to be participating, it was trouble,
mm,
because there was a lot of control
mm,
and so many things were banned. But it also has that element of um mystery. I think it is very sort of, are we going to get caught?
mm.
The suspense is there because they're having to
Yeah.
be so careful.
I think it was such an interesting period. I mean, I love Cabaret; it's one of my very favorite.
Brilliant musical.
And this is set slightly a few years earlier than that, so you don't see the same kind of threatening thing from kind of Nazis
No.
again. Uh, so, but there were a lot of political tensions in the city between the communists and the social democrats, and and people on the right, and it was a real boiling pot of politics and emotion, and that's what makes the Weimar Republic quite interesting. Plus, people are quite traumatized generally, having gone through the First World War.
But not only the First World War, there was also the flu pandemic in
Mm.
1918, which decimated
Yeah,
populations
yeah,
after the war. I mean, they didn't really need anything
yeah.
else.
And it was very similar in this country. So then you start to get that the rise of this kind of very hedonistic approach to life, which is, well, we could all be dead tomorrow.
Mm.
We might as well just have a good time now. Let's just dance and drink and take drugs and go crazy, you know.
Well,
And
that's
so
what the
these
20s
clubs,
were like everywhere, wasn't it? It was
yeah,
very much the flapper girls and
yeah,
the drugs and everything else, which is, it was the era in which drug regulation actually came into play.
yeah, exactly, for very good reasons.
Yes.
Um, and so I thought, well, that, is just such a fascinating setting. And with the Babylon Circus nightclub, what I wanted to do is make it almost a character in this as well. And it's there in every decade in a
Yeah.
slightly changed way. I've always had this fascination ever since my debut, when I wrote That Green-Eyed Girl, based around an apartment in New York that two different sets of people lived in. And so you went back and forth between 1975 with a young woman living in there with a mentally ill mother, and the 1950s, where a pair of gay teachers are living there, Dovey and Gillian, in a time when it was illegal. But I love the idea of buildings, and I'm a city girl by heart, so I love the idea of seeing houses, who's lived in that house before, what was that building, what did it used to be, how many stories have happened around that building, and how different are those stories. So I like the changing face of kind of buildings and
Yeah.
the history those buildings possess. It is that kind of, if these walls could talk.
Yeah, it sounds strange, but it's very much like Only Murders in the Building and the Arconium. It's a character.
Mm,
How many things happened, how many people lived there, how these tunnels mysteriously appeared and things like that. And
yeah,
that is something that really came across with the circus, because as you said, it does appear in every single part of the story, and it has a different role to play in
mm,
each part of it, with the final one being almost like its closing act.
yeah, yeah. I think so, and I wanted people. I always write quite visually, because I love kind of cinema
Mm.
and photographs, and that's just speaks to me and my process. So when I'm writing, I could almost see it like a movie, and I thought that I wanted to see that building, which has this real seedy glamour in the beginning,
Yeah.
and then obviously, as the city does, deteriorates through every single time period here, because after the war, obviously, it's not in terribly great condition. And then by the 1960s, you know, it's again has been through another change. And I think it's reflective of what happened to a lot of the parts of Berlin during that time period. And in fact, if you go into what used to be East Berlin now, there are still some examples of buildings that have not quite been renovated, have been kind of left over, you know, from those days. I mean, I remember actually going to Berlin in the early 1990s, which wasn't long after the war.
I went through Berlin in 1993.
Yeah, I mean, I must have gone through that about the same similar kind of time period, and it was very different. You could tell immediately when you were in the West and when you were in the East.
To be fair, though, that it was only 4 years after the wall came down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there were so many things going on. It's amazing to think how little the city had evolved in that period, because they were almost stuck in this time warp of it's control. It was massive control, and the terrifying prospect of being separated from your family and not being able to get anywhere because you're not allowed to.
Yeah, exactly. And even when the wall came down, economically, it took so long to balance both sides back up again. So I wanted to kind of reflect that journey of the city, really, through those time periods of going from the 1920s through to the 1940s through to the 1960s. The Babylon Circus really represents Berlin in that, I think.
The way you described the streets and the houses, the derelict buildings, the bomb sites and everything else, it was almost like watching, you know, the old, slightly stuttery war films, newsreels from the war that were kind of shuddering and disjointed. And that's how certain elements of it came across. I could see it in my head, because I'm quite, when it comes to reading, I'm a very visual person, and I love being able to see everything in my head as I'm reading it. And I really could do that with this book, because I could see the streets, and I could see the place where Leni, the street where Leni would hide her sister because they were homeless, and say, stay there, don't move.
Yeah.
And all of those things really were clear. And I loved that about it.
Thank you. Well, it's quite a lot of work to embroider all those details in. And what I always do is write it down, and then I go over it and over it and over it and over it. And then my editor will look at it and say, oh, can I just have a bit more? Can I just have a few more details? Oh, I just want to. But I always try to work all the senses, so that I want the reader to feel they could almost reach out a hand and touch it, or they could smell it. You know, or if it's food that they could taste it. That I want to involve all those senses when you're reading. What I try to do, because although I'm writing historical fiction, I want to take, I mean, I write mostly for women. I mean, I have male readers and I welcome them, and that's fantastic. But I'm interested in writing for women and women's stories, and kind of explaining women back to ourselves, really, in some respects, in giving trying to get people to have food for thought. But what I want is, I want my readers to read the book and put themselves in the position of those women, and whether they like them, whether they don't like them, it's just, well, what would I have done in that circumstance? And then also, because most of these situations in my 3 books to date actually involve almost kind of moral dilemmas or kind of quandaries in some respects that you can still see replicated today, because it's only historical fiction here. You know, there are still places, sadly, in the world where, for example, people are recovering from war, or in the middle of war, where people's buildings are bombed to smithereens and they're trying to start again, where women, you know, bear the brunt of economic difficulties, war, you know, and all of the things that go with it, that they're trying to care for their families, trying to keep on going while men are fighting, or, you know, or they're suffering from all of the privations of war. So what I like to do is, it's historical fiction, but it also has a relevance, I think, to the modern day, because you can take those questions and those people and say, well, okay, yeah, but over here we actually have exactly the same circumstance. And so, you know, I just want to give people a way of almost experiencing a different time period, but also experiencing those questions and those dilemmas for themselves, and going, oh, okay, and then trying to make it as real as possible for everyone, so that you come away from it thinking, oh my God, that was just like I was in the 1920s in a cabaret club, and I had a front seat, and that was great. And then the next thing, I'm in the middle of this devastated city with all this rubble and everything. So I think that's, you know, what I attempt to do, you know, whenever I'm writing.
I think one of the moments that made that incredibly clear about the woman's position in the aftermath of war was when Leni's husband suddenly returns 3 years after the war has finished. He's obviously got PTSD, though that's not stated because it's not a condition that was recognized at that point. And she's the one who takes the brunt of it all.
And that's, again, it's one of these situations where I do like to take my women and put them in situations where you just think, well, what on earth would that be like? I mean, just imagine you've just come through this period which has been horrendous and gone on for years and years and years. I mean, you know, when we look at, luckily in this country, in our kind of modern generation, we haven't had too much you know, experience like that. But my grandmother obviously used to tell stories about sheltering children under the stairs and from bombs and all of these kinds of things during the war.
My grandmother was sent away during the war because she was born in 1929.
And yeah, I mean, you know, and on all of those kinds of experiences, thankfully we don't have. And yeah, when we experienced the pandemic, which went on for too long for all of us, but a reasonably short period of time in terms of history, and then that led me to actually write 73 Dove Street, because I started thinking about my grandmother and thinking, well, I've had enough of this after about 6 months. And yet my grandmother lived through this war with 3 children under the age of 5 for 5 years, you know, 6 years almost. And I'm thinking, imagine that life. Oh my goodness. So, you know, I think that that was very interesting to me, to take somebody like Leni, having gone through all of that period, and the glamorous cabaret years are over, and she's gone through this devastation with the entire country. And then your husband turns up again.
That's the thing. She'd have gone through it twice. So the first time she'd have been a lot younger.
Yeah. Exactly.
She'd have gone through the First World War.
Yeah.
And then the flu epidemic, then her parents dying and her brothers dying, and then the Second World War.
Yeah, exactly.
And then everything that came afterwards.
Yeah. And that really is to my kind of theme here, really, of that it really depends when you're born and where you're born, because if she'd been born 50 years later, her life would have been a very different life. I mean, there'd been struggles and ups and downs and whatever, but for example, you know, she would have been a baby just as the Berlin Wall went up, but she would have lived to see the Berlin Wall come down.
Yes.
And she would have had a very different life after that. So, you know, like my grandmother, I think, was born in 1909, and she lived through 2 world wars and, you know, the flu epidemic and pandemic and all the rest of it. And a Great Depression in the 30s as well.
So did one set of my grandparents was a lot older than the other set,
Mm.
and they lived through 2 world wars. My grandmother came from Belgium, so she had it lovely over there. I'm absolutely positive. And then came over on one of the last boats from Dunkirk during the Second World War.
Goodness. Wow. So it just goes to show that your whole life story changes. It's so we're so fortunate if you're born into a peaceful country at a peaceful time. That is just the luck of the draw, isn't it? You could have been born somewhere else. And
Or 40 years earlier.
yes,
Well,
exactly.
actually 30 years earlier.
Yeah. So
that's so scary. There's not that much difference.
It's the luck of the draw. And I think sometimes we think, oh well, we created this good time ourselves or this good luck ourselves, but we didn't. It's entirely random that we are all the issue of kind of thousands of decisions that our ancestors made before us, and out we pop at a certain moment in time.
Well, I think that's one of the things that you really do bring up and kind of bring home with Annette in America, when there's that conversation and that resentment that she is given because she is German. And it's like, it's not her fault. She didn't make the decisions that led to what occurred by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that's the problem. So many people are very in the book, but in general, they're very quick to go, oh, you're that, so you're responsible for this. So, but not really. And I think that's something that she had to kind of sit back and go, well, no, I'm not going to accept this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very difficult situation to be in. In fact, my auntie is German, and she came to live in Wales with my uncle in the 1950s, so a little time after the war. But she experienced quite a lot of that because obviously people had lost people. They had, and so it becomes you're a representative of something that they can shout at,
Yeah. But then surely the same could be said for anybody who is English, American, or any other nation that were part of the Allied forces if you're in Germany.
Yeah, I mean, it's, it is very much, it's very unfair to take individuals who have had no part in any of this. And that was kind of why, in some respects, I wrote the book, because I wanted to just look at ordinary working class women who had no political power, no economic power particularly, who were just trying to get on and live a life, survive in lots of ways, because survival in that time period for working class people wasn't a given. That you could get illnesses for which we had absolutely no vaccinations. There was just poverty, there was malnutrition, anything. So these women or girls are just trying to get by, and then they're picking up the pieces afterwards from other people's political decisions. So that to me was a really sweet spot of kind of, well, this is interesting, because how much responsibility do we say that people from a nation have, for example, if they've elected people, or do we blame everybody, or does this come down to just individual behavior and morality? So all of those choices, I think, underpin this book, and I think give book clubs and some interesting conversations, should they choose to have them, because I think there's a lot that underpins the choices of these two women beyond kind of, or we root for one because she's nice and we like her, and we don't really like the other one very much because she's.
That is what's really, really tough, because it was very hard to like Annette because of the decisions she'd previously made. However, in the moment where she's having that very awkward conversation around the dinner table, being made to feel incredibly unwelcome because she's not the woman that they wanted their son to marry, and she's German. How dare she? and they start talking about her as though almost she's not human.
Yeah, and that I think is kind of interesting to take somebody. It's interesting for a writer to do, because if you've deliberately made somebody a real selfish cow, and then you put them in a situation which will generate some sympathy for them, probably. So yeah, I'm quite manipulative like that. So I'm kind of toying with your feelings and going like, okay, she's quite a complicated person here. So how are you going to feel about her now? Because difficult to hate her when she's on the receiving end of this, you know?
The thing is, humans are by their nature complicated.
Mm,
So every single character is, it's like the line from Shrek. I'm like an onion, I have many layers.
yeah.
And humans are,
Yeah.
they aren't just this one note. I mean, there may well be some people out there that are one note, but for the most part, people aren't one note. They don't just have this, I am selfish and I do this. They have those little thoughts going, well, if I do that, is this going to happen? And if
Yeah.
I do that, it's going to benefit me, but it's going to hurt that person, but I need that more than they do. So it sort of shows that warring nature that we have. And that conversation that Annetta was basically forced into and clearly uncomfortable being a part of was one of those situations. And she did stand up for herself. It's like, the thing is, on both sides of war, there are always going to be losers, and they're normally the people on the ground.
Yeah, and yeah, it's a moment where, you know, probably one of the few times, other than possibly the very beginning of the book, where we kind of feel a little bit sorry for Annetta, you know. But I think what's interesting is, for me, is I like to look at characters sometimes and go, what role has kind of trauma played here that's changed somebody's behavior? Because a lot of the time we all have our wounds, and people feel very tenderly about their wounds, and therefore we try to keep other people's grubby paws off our wounds. And a lot of our behavior is meant to do that. It's meant to say, don't come any further, because this hurts me, or this you know, triggers me in some way. So we're a lot of people's, I find it fascinating watching people for the kind of the masking that's going on. And I think Annetta's one of those. I think if you were sitting in a cafe having a nice cup of coffee and you saw Annetta, I think it would probably be fairly obvious to most people studying her that she's given a performance in some respects. And so, yeah, I felt a bit sorry for her in that situation, around the dining table in that particular conversation. And then there are parts of the book where I don't feel sorry for her at all. I think she's awful and just selfish and manipulative.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But
that's a control thing as well. I think if you're very scared and you've undergone some fearful experiences, then you want to control everything around you. And that's what she's like. And it makes her not very pleasant sometimes. But I think it all comes out in the wash. And I don't know, I think I always love all of my characters. They don't always behave very well, but I always hold them tenderly and wish them well, and, you know, hope they have happy lives.
Yeah, that was, I liked the fact that, without spoilers, it has there is the opportunity for optimism.
Yes, and I wouldn't call it a happy ending, but I think
no, that's why I said the opportunity for optimism.
Yes, yeah,
it's great for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I like to hold over some control to those individuals and go, well, you can make the best of a life here now if you want to, because everything's out on the table, everybody understands each other, and you can move forward again. And whether you'll move forward well and happily, or whether you'll revert back to the same old patterns of behavior because you'll be trying to manipulate and control, or you'll be fearful about making yourself vulnerable and stepping forward. I think for most people find vulnerability quite scary. And so I think Annette is one of those. I think she's terrified of being vulnerable, and that leads to nearly all of her bad behavior.
And it also leads to people feeling alienated by her.
Yeah.
And her behaviors and her emotions and her actions. But Leni is kind of, she opens herself up to that pain, I think.
Yeah, I think she is more practical in as much as she is willing to sit with it and say, yes, I'm sad. Now I'm going to get up and wash the dishes. But I'm gonna do what I need to do and care for the people I need to care for and be sad. I think Annette would just go, I'm sad, I need to change that feeling. I don't like it.
Yeah, I'm going to go away and I'm going to make out that other people feel sad.
Yes.
Then I don't feel sad anymore.
Exactly that. I think that's exactly right. That's exactly what she does. A lot of people do that, actually.
Yeah, that's the thing. These characters are so real.
Mm.
In a way that's a fantastic thing, but it's also quite scary because you can see certain elements of your own behaviors reflected in what they do.
Yeah, I try to make them as real as possible, and I try to make even the minor characters feel as real as possible. It drives me nuts because I occasionally do get criticism for like kind of, oh, well, I would have liked to have known more about this minor character. And I'm thinking, I've given you a book that's over 100,000 words long.
Yeah, but read it. That's the thing. I think that's a sign, though, that these characters have had an impact.
Yes, and I take it as a great compliment that even the tiny characters that people believe in them and think, oh, well, I want to know about their life and stuff. And they're thinking, well, that's lovely, but that's actually another book, people.
Yes, I think that's it. It's this need, this incessant need from readers, and I say this as a reader, to have a sequel. But I often prefer it when a book is, this is the end of the book, and I can go off and imagine that something nice happened and things ended really well.
Yeah.
Even if there were kind of indicators that potentially it didn't quite end how I would have liked it to. But then that's my job as a reader.
Exactly that. With my 3 books so far, I have to say, because I don't intend, I mean, you can never say never, but I don't intend to ever write a sequel to any of my books. Because everything you need to know about those characters is there. Now you can go off and imagine what might they do. If you, at the end, you read this book and you go, well, what life might Leni have had? Oh, I can imagine that life for Leni, actually. Oh, well, I can imagine a life for Annette, and
you gave the readers the Lego bricks.
Yeah, exactly.
To actually say, well, this was heading in that direction, this happened, this conversation occurred.
Yeah.
I'm going to move it in that direction, but maybe if she did that, this would have happened. And that's how I like it when I finish a book. I love being able to do that. Yes, I do love sequels. I've got plenty of them sitting on my shelves. I do love them, but I also love a book that is, this is the end.
Yes. Yeah, you can take these characters and dream about them if you want. I'm done with them. I've moved on to the next book.
Created fan fiction.
Yeah, exactly. And I love it that people care about what happened to them, or they want to know, and they want another life and whatever. It's like me, I'm nearly finished with book 4, love. I'm done with these characters.
Really?
Yeah. My deadline's the end of this month. In fact, I'm about 10,000 words from finishing.
Wow. Yeah. So do you finish one book and start the next immediately, or do you finish one book and give yourself a bit of a breather? It's a question I ask every author, because everyone is different. Some people will say, I give myself a month off and I go on holiday and I relax, and then I do the whole publication process and the previews and the promotion, and then the other book's already written.
Well, I didn't intend to write 4 books in 5 years, I think now. That wasn't how it was intended to be. But I got my book deal, and then my debut wasn't coming out for 2 years. So they said, oh, well, if you've got another idea, maybe write that. So I did. And that was 73 Dove Street. And that came out last year. And then when I'd finished writing 73 Dove Street, we were talking about new contract, and I had this idea for a Berlin book, which was supposed to come out, I think, next year. And then this is going to be annoying because I can't tell you what it is because it's top secret. But I was having lunch with my editor and I had a glass of wine and I said to her, I've had this really weird idea, actually. And I told her this idea, which involved 2 real life women. I can tell you that. And her little eyes lit up immediately. And she started scrolling through her kind of schedule and gone like, well, if you can let me have it by this date and whatever. So yes, consequently, that book that I'm now finishing, book 4, which is about 2 real life women, I'm not allowed to say anything else on pain of death, will be announced next year and will be out in 2026.
2026?
Yeah.
So you're getting a two year for the editing process and everything else?
Well, I think probably proofs will be out next year. So I think it'll be edited by Christmas. We're in a bit of a hurry.
But it's 2025 next year, so it's the whole of next year.
Yeah, it's going to be a big campaign for it, I think. I can't say too much at the moment. I think it's going to be announced in January, so then I can stop keeping it secret and being coy with it. It's going to be very exciting. That's all I can say. I'm having fun writing it.
Now my brain is going real life women, and it's historical.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe not. Who knows?
No. That leaves it open to so much.
I know. Well, you'll all have to wait and see. I'm a woman of mystery. But yeah, so Circus of Mirrors, because I'm doing the promotion for that, obviously, because it's out next Thursday on the 12th.
Yes.
And so, I'm doing that, and I'm writing at the same time when I have days off. So it's a bit of a crazy month. And I'm never working like this. I was saying to my editor all the time, I'm never working like this again. We're never doing this again. From now on, it will go into kind of hardback, the year after paperback, maybe the year after that, nice hardback. And I will give myself, months off at a time so I can rest and recuperate.
I think that's it. So many people I've spoken with have said, I literally have a month off, and then it's on the road with the promotion and starting the next book. Yeah. And you think, how do you do that? I mean, I just about cope with working full time and doing this. And reading all the books that come with it, though, to be fair, I would read them anyway. So
yeah. I mean, it can be tricky, it can be tricky, but writing and publishing are 2 different things, and publishing has a schedule and deadlines. It's a business, it's a job like any other. So if, effectively there's the artist part of it, which is me sitting at home in my pajamas and thinking about my women and going down research rabbit holes and all.
I'm guessing drinking copious amounts of tea or coffee.
Exactly. And forcing myself out in the rain to go for a nice walk around the park. And then there's the publishing part of it, which is like, can you get it to us by the end of September, please? Because we need it for this. And then we want to, we'll get proofs by here and we'll announce it here and boom, 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 and you are making sausage for the sausage factory, basically.
Did you always want to be a writer, though?
I always loved books and I always loved writing and kind of arting stuff, but I come from a very working class background, and I grew up in a council estate and left school at 16, and that just wasn't an option. It just wasn't an option. Nobody I knew worked in the arts. People had proper jobs.
Yeah. I left school. I did do my A-levels. I left school. I went to Austria and I taught in an all-boys school on the border of Austria and Yugoslavia in 1992.
Right.
Literally 2 months after I got, no, not even 2 months after I got there, war broke out.
Yes.
Which was great. And I stayed there for a year, came back and worked in an office.
Yeah. So, life throws you curveballs, but I think as I got older, I realized that it had been something that had always been with me and I never got to realize it. So when I hit 50, in my 50th year, I thought, I am going to give myself the gift of taking this seriously. And I went and did a creative writing course, and then just worked and worked and worked at it and got rejected like a billion times. And I think just before my 60th birthday, I got my book deal.
So a decade.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much of writing and trying and abandoning things and trying different. I mean, it wasn't all like trying to write novels. It was different kinds of things. But there was a long period of probably 4 or 5 years of trying to write a novel and make it work. And it did not. And then I finally got one that did. Hurrah! And
would you change anything about what you've done, or would you have started earlier, or do you think that now was the right time?
Oh, I mean, there is part of me, obviously, that thinks, oh, I wish I'd been able to do this when I was kind of, 30. It would have been so great. I would have had, all of those years. And then I look back and think, yeah, but I didn't have very much to say when I was 30 because I had very little experience of life. So I think all of your experience makes you better at characters, makes you better, I think, at nuance, less likely to be kind of definite about people, that I can live with people like characters not being very nice or that, because I understand, I guess, people's motivations a bit more.
And not everything is, and it's not everything is black and white. There are a huge range of shades of grey. We're not going to go 50, but there are a huge range of shades, and Annette definitely falls in that one.
Yeah. And I think, most people are like icebergs. You only see a tiny tip.
Yeah.
And then below the surface, there's a lot of psychology and history and events and things that you're not prone to. And so you don't know, what goes on with people. You can only see their behavior, and sometimes that's bad behavior, but it doesn't mean they're a horrible person. It just means what they've done is pretty horrible. And
in the books, you're giving the characters nuance, you're giving them that depth, and enabling us, the readers, to actually see who they are beneath the surface that we would only be able to observe if they were seen as one-dimensional characters.
Exactly. And that's my job, I think, is to try and take you inside a complete stranger and go, okay, try this life on for a few hours and see how that suits you, and that's why we love reading. That's why I love reading. I want to be put into a different world, and I want to be put inside a different character and think, oh, wow, this is amazing.
Escapism. Not necessarily to a good place all the time, but it is escapism.
Yeah, it's experience, isn't it? And through that, I think we get to know ourselves better, because whatever you're reading and whatever characters you're looking at, I think you start to compare the behavior of those people and the actions of those people to yourself. And we go, sometimes we don't like people because they remind us of ourselves, our weaknesses, sometimes our vulnerabilities, and sometimes we like people because we see part of ourselves in them. So I love that complication of it all, really, of saying that, people are endlessly fascinating and characters can be endlessly fascinating. And our relationship to them, I think, is why we love to read books so much, and long may that continue.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think I'd be, I always say that my bookcases, some of them anyway, are a reflection of my life. They're my autobiography. Because I can remember I read that book at that moment, and I read that book at that moment, and it made me feel this. And this is a reason why this book, I've got 4 copies of it, because my original one is falling apart, but I don't want to throw it away.
Yeah.
And I've got loads of books like that, actually, because they have been part of my life for probably 45 years.
Yeah. Books can be like old friends, can't they? They're great.
Exactly. And I think that is what comes across with Circus of Mirrors, is the fact that you can look at these 2 characters as people you might know, or yourself.
Yeah. And hopefully, people enjoy it, and it's a good read, and they learn a little about Berlin, and they learn a little about these characters, and maybe they learn a little bit about themselves along the thing. So that's a bargain, I think.
It sent me down a rabbit hole, I have to say.
Well, there you go. And enjoy your own little rabbit hole. And you'll have to wait with great anticipation to find out what the next one is.
Yes, I am now very, very curious, I have to admit. So where can people find out more information about the book? And I'm guessing you're going to be doing a lot of, well, not a lot, but you're going to be doing a considerable amount of press and interviews and things like that. So where can people find information out about that?
People can go to my website, julieowenmoylan.com. All my events will be on there. And if they follow me on social media, which is always at Julie Owen Moylan, I'm always updating people on the latest stories or what I'm up to. And they can just follow along and get more information there and find out what's going on.
Fantastic. And of course, Circus of Mirrors comes out on Thursday the 12th, which is just a few days after this is going live. So perfect timing. And it really is a fantastic book. As I said, I could have quite happily sat at the kitchen table at work and read the whole thing.
Well, that's what I like to do.
Back.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming on, and I will make sure to post all of the links so people can find you. But it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you. It was great.
Well, that's it for this week, and thank you for listening. And thank you again to my guest, Julie Owen Moylan. Her latest novel, Circus of Mirrors, is out on Thursday, the 12th of September, published by Michael Joseph. It's a wonderful historical novel that really makes you think. And if you love a story driven by character development and the complexity of human nature, then this is definitely one you should pick up. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family? And please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other podcatchers where you listen. It really does help the algorithm. Yeah, I know I say that every week, but it's true. You can follow me on Instagram as beingbookishpod, on X as being_bookish, and on my YouTube channel, Ray Loves Reading, also listed under at beingbookishpod. You can find video book reviews, full audio only podcast episodes, and some bookish shorts. As ever, I have a lot to get ready for next week. I'm in the office on my own for the most part, and I am in the middle of reading another book from the TBR. So until next time, this is me saying farewell.